Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Definitive Analysis, and today we're going to jump back into some Sherwood Anderson, based on a story out of his collection of short stories, which seem pretty unrelated. The other book I teach some stories out of is Winesburg, Ohio, and those are all, for the most part, interconnected, all within the town, fictional town of Winesburg, Ohio. But these, from what I've read so far, and I haven't finished the whole book, probably about half of it, these don't seem to be connected in quite so intimate a manner. But the story that I'm going to cover today is I Want to Know Why, and there's not a lot of material out there, whether you look online or on YouTube. There's a couple videos, and interesting videos, because I think it is based on a very interesting short story with kind of a preposterous narrator, right? Or main character here, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to jump right into it. Probably a few weeks ago, I put together some lecture notes, knowing that I wanted to put together this definitive analysis on this story because it captivated me so much, and I kind of couldn't get it out of my brain. And I think it's hard to analyze. I don't think Anderson's work is at all easy, and this is probably, I think, one of the more difficult stories. But let's get into it. We start with our narrator discussing a African-American individual who lives in his town named Bildad Johnson. And I think Anderson constantly uses names, right, to provide meaning for us. So I think it's right off the bat, this is helpful. Bildad translates to, believe it or not, old friendship. And for anyone who's read this story, I think that's a pretty acceptable term, right, for this character Billdad Johnson, because he seems to be the eternal friend who is always there helping without question. Just seems to be built into his character, right, as this poor African-American man who's in love, just like our narrator is and some other characters, with these thoroughbred horses, right, and the whole horse racing scene. So we start off with that important name, old friendship. The last name Johnson translates to God is gracious. Another, I think, pretty good way to understand the intent of this character, right? Very gracious, always, as we'll see, serving them food, providing them a place to sleep, right? When these white characters, right, this narrator with his friends, are in need. We think about the idea of race. You know, this is a story that's all about horse racing, and then sidled right next to it is the importance of race relations, right? White and black. Are we playing upon that idea? Are we in this race to achieve some kind of progress? And if so, what is that progress going to be? Are we in this race to highlight the sense of competition, right? Which is what I emphasize to my students when we think about the word race. As a runner, I think of a starting line and then everyone just trying to go as fast as they can and leaving people behind nonetheless. So is that how we think of race, right? With the horse racing that we have here. Now, right off the bat, I'll just mention this. Bildad Johnson, a lot of positive meaning tied up into his name. And we recognize that what the narrator perceives and thinks and feels is that that grace or that graciousness is lacking within white society, even his own family, but definitely with other white individuals that he perceives, right? And all of this culminates in the presence of the character toward the end of this story called named Jerry Tillford, who is the trainer of one of those thoroughbreds, right? And while in awe of this man, our main character, our white young man, will also see the kind of cruel and vicious and malicious side, right, of Jerry Tillford, the egotistical side, really, and we'll get there. Now, one thing I want to cover right off the bat, almost as a disclaimer, is one thing that stands out about this story is the excessive use of the N-word throughout the story. And it's never in necessarily vicious ways, right? Like white characters addressing black characters and using this word. It's all in his own mind. We have the use of the N-word. I think what it shows is the highly normalized use of this vernacular at the time. Now, it still is racist. I don't want to gloss over that. You know, we use this term, we think this term. I think there's some racism involved there, but that's where we find the most irony with our main character, right? Is that even as he uses this word, right, the casual use of the word, but on a deeper analysis, what's revealed here is a more societal conditioning surrounding the us versus them mentality, right? That there's us within this society that we live in, and there are thems, and maybe not just one thems, but multiple thems, right? But you see a clear distinction and division between you and others. The irony for our character is that even when using the N word over and over, kind of in his mind, right? Part of it is just a kind of vocabulary of his internal thinking. He always feels as if black people are the people he wants to be around, that seem to be more fulfilling, seem to be more genuine, seem to be kinder, seem to be less cruel, right? And that makes him feel warm and decent. And he mentions this, right, very clearly, directly throughout. I think what stands out about this, and I like this theme, because I think a lot of white individuals deal with this particular theme growing up within their environments, perhaps, learning about our history in this country, right, which is obviously not a very pretty history when it comes to race relations. But I think what we have here is the theme of disassociation. A white young man, in some ways, disassociating from the white culture in which he spawns from, right, in which he comes from. And maybe it's largely because this white culture, maybe, is based on a capitalistic culture, right? But we constantly will associate black people, even through the use of the N-word in this internal thinking, with hospitality and warmth and genuine attention and care, right? And we'll see this, especially with that character, Bildad Johnson. All right. What ends up being the vital bond between white and black in this story? It's the thoroughbred racehorses, right? It becomes the vital commonality. And he notices that Bildad Johnson and other young black people are, because they take care of the horses, right? And they kind of tend to the care, right, of the stalls, the horse itself. He says, I wish I was an N, right? And kind of a very blunt way of saying, right, in his own way, I wish I had more of a life attuned to those particular characteristics, right? What he sees in these young black men as they genuinely care for these animals. They love them too, right? It's not just our narrator who loves these thoroughbred horses, it's the black young people as well who are maybe more in a social position to have to take care of these animals, right? And so there's the irony. I wish I was doing this job. Well, maybe not in terms of societal standing and work, right, and career, but closeness to the animals and a real eagerness and earnestness to be a part of that. Well, yes, you can see why he would desire, right, to want to be a black person in this context. He establishes that there's this contingency of white men. They seem to be pretty well off, right? He says the sportiest ones. And sport is interesting because as soon as we say sport, for the most part, it suggests an idea of competition, right? There's always a competition involved. I just ran a race last weekend, did a marathon, and yes, people are competing, right? Whether it's against themselves or other people, especially those top runners, right? It's a competition. This gets us to the theme of envy, which might be the cardinal sin, or more specifically, who are we envying, right? Are we envying these rich whites from where they live, Beckersville, right? Or are we envying his own father, who's a lawyer, but we don't hear much about him other than that. I think our narrator has more condemning things to say against other white fathers that he knows, right? The bankers, the professional gamblers, right? He doesn't have a very fond perspective on them. His own dad seems to escape a lot of that criticism, but he doesn't really talk about his father all that much, right? This is a white child, a young white man who is finding affinity and allegiances elsewhere, right? Not within his just white family. The big to-do here in this story is the trip to Saratoga Springs, I believe, right? Which I think is up in New York, if I'm not mistaken. Another story by Truman Capote called Shut a Final Door, and our main character is going through a big emotional upheaval, and that story ends up arriving at Saratoga Springs. And I think same idea with this story. It's to really remind us of the idea of competition in capitalism. You know, we talk about the virtues of capitalism, strength through competition, right? We create more, better products, better prices, right, etc. But it is competition nonetheless, which means some people are going to win out and some people are going to absolutely lose, right, and have nothing to show for that. And I think in our country, our culture, we like to focus on the success of all this and not necessarily the detriment, right, the loss of all of this. So there's the idea. Maybe this high-stakes horse racing really represents the capitalistic environment that we all come from, right? And even these race relations start to build within this capitalistic kind of paradigm that we have. And with that, a sense of rugged individualism, right? That we're all capable of success based on our own hard work and merit and virtue, right? Not on other people. It's all just about ourselves. And that's a perspective. You can agree with that or disagree with that. And that's largely what gets us also into conversations of socialist governments versus capitalist governments. Capitalist governments are going to say it's based on the individual. You either work hard or you suffer, whereas socialist institutions, let's say, would say, no, there is going to be some help for those who don't necessarily rise to the occasion, right? So that leads to that bigger conversation. Now, our narrator wants to go to Saratoga, but not for the gambling purposes, which the men of the town are going to go for, right? It's to see the horses, but it's also to gamble on the whole event, but not for our main character. He's going for a complete adoration, adulation of the thoroughbreds, right? That's what he wants to see. We get more characterization of Bildad, just like the name suggests, right? Old friendship. And I love old, because if we travel back in time into United States history with race relations, you know, maybe there's a way of going back even before that, right? Just this whole concept of an old friendship, one that endures, one that's been around forever, right? Despite the treatment. All right, so we get further characterization of Bildad here, just like the name suggests, hospitable, right? Very loyal and trustworthy. Hospitable in the sense that he feeds them. Loyal and trustworthy in that he will not rat on their whereabouts, right? They're not supposed to be. This young troop of white men is not supposed to be going to Saratoga Springs, right? Taking this, this kind of epic voyage, if you will. And Bildad's not the kind of guy who's going to go back to town and rat them out, right? So there it is, trustworthy, and more upfront and respectful of younger age groups, right? There is that kind of division of old and young in this story, but here Bildad seems to discount any of that sense of division between young and old, and he treats the young with very much a lot of respect, right? A lot of respect for these young guys. And just like the name symbolizes, Bildad meets all of the characteristics of an old friend. It really stands out, right? Really stands out. Other fathers caution on how to earn money. So there is some kind of moral compass in Beckersville, right, that seems to be operating. Some fathers feel that gambling full-time for a living, which is what one of the young man's fathers does. He's a full-time gambler. And I can't say I really, it's definitely a possibility. It's a profession. You can gamble full-time, whether it be on sporting events or otherwise, right? But they don't seem to have a very positive perspective on this, right? Organizing gambling is not a moral, ethical way to earn money. And our narrator mentions, I'm puzzled. I'm getting to be a man and I want to think straight and be okay. And it's very simple language, but it's also very profound. As a young man or even a young woman would grow up, we're really trying to get a sense of where our morals and ethics lie, right? What jobs do I find appropriate? Where do I see a sense of outrage? And how will that dictate the choices that I make, the careers I might go into, the type of person that I want to be? So I think it's a very profound line. I think it speaks highly to this whole idea of developing a sense of morals and ethics, which could be a big part of what our young man is going through here. He is trying to establish all of that, right? We are provided a contrast to the idea of a trustful friend with, which would be Bildad, with the narrator's anecdote about Henry Hellenfinger. This is a story that's told, and sometimes with these stories you're left, you know, with these ideas, this anecdote swirling through your mind thinking, well, what's the point of all of this, right? There must be a point to it, or why would the author spend a page or pages developing this anecdotal information? I think what it is it shows us a contrast to Bildad. Hellenfinger is somebody who takes advantage of somebody else's earnestness to be a jockey, right, which would be our main character. We asked if Bildad would do that, right? And he basically said, like, go try this. He knew it would be bad for our main character, this guy, Henry Hellenfinger, but he was just playing a trick on him, right? And I just encountered that idea on a nature program yesterday when it was talking about chimpanzees, and then it echoed an idea that we get from Philip K. Dick's book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the smarter people are, the smarter a species is, the meaner they usually are, right? So smartness equals meanness. And notice Henry was obviously smarter than our main character, who earnestly wants to be a jockey, right, and fit that physical stature, right? He took advantage of that, right? And in it, he showed his meanness, his contempt, right, for another human being. Okay, a lot of irony here. He desires, our main character desires to be a stable hand to work with those horses so badly that he is willing to give up a sense of white privilege in regards to attaining better employment, and instead yearns for those black jobs. So even an objective sense of economic fortitude and getting ahead seems to depart, right, for our narrator here, our main character. All he really places upon it is the bond of the horses, and he can see that clearly this is what he has in common with these lower skilled black workers, right? Even though as a white person, we talk about white privilege, having that easy kind of trail up, as opposed to other races that might have a bumpier ride, right? Finding resources and opportunities. I think that's what we have here, right? He's part of the privileged part of his society, but for him it doesn't matter, right? Because he wants to be closer to these horses and the characteristics of these young men, right? That he sees with these horses. Maybe that's the more important lure that we have. Though this is his desire to work these jobs, right, that these young black men work, whites are given, the racist paradigm cannot be eluded, right? Like I just mentioned, it's there, right? You can't get away from it. Black people get the lower skilled jobs, whites are given every chance to aim higher, right? And we just happen to have a non-objective white young man who just sees things a bit differently as those morals and those ethics start to, let's say, coagulate and kind of take form, right? All right. All right. Another thing to remember here, because we talked about ego at the beginning of the lecture. Now, by the end, when you start talking about that Henry Tillford, or what is his name? Jerry Tillford, you're going to be talking about ego quite a bit. So many jobs referred to in white society, which is all society, right, especially at this point in the Midwest here, really at this time the oppressor society are based on ego. Aggressive, perhaps reckless risk, which Bildad Johnson seems to not even be aware of. All right. We get some language here, clean and full of spunk as some racehorses. They are able to transcend a corrupted humanity, right? The horses lie outside this social paradigm, right? And all they kind of exist to do is race and show their elegance and their power and their majesty, right? That seems to be all the horses have to worry about. But because of all that, what they represent, it allows the whites and ends, as he says, to sit on the same fence, right? So it's providing some kind of bond. And we can't simply leave it at, oh, they like to watch the horses together. No, you have to start to ask everything involved here. How do they feel about the horses? How do they feel about the care of the horses, right? How do they feel about their own lives in comparison to the horses, right? And I think once we track a lot of those characteristics, we start to see the appeal here that this young white man has to these black people as well, right? It's bringing everybody together to somehow kind of defy the division of the time and just focus on this horse. Now, in particular, there's a certain type of young black person that our young white narrator cherishes the most, and it's the track ends, right? That's what he says, the track ends. Basically, the young black people who work on the tracks, who are closest to that majestic purpose and action, right, of this horse race, right? They are the closest to the show, closest to the experience, closest to the animals that will prove themselves, right, on that course. But now we're presented with a contrast. We have the racetrack ends, or the racetrack black people, right, young black people, versus the trainers. And the trainers we recognize are all white men, right? The white men are the trainers. The young narrator is aware that he may enter and join the white world. For instance, he says, I could be a gambler at any time, but he seems to be growing in conscience against it as he shortly thinks afterward, but I don't, right? He doesn't have any yearning for that. The black people, despite not having much, seem to commune in a utopia of sorts here at Saratoga, providing each other with valuable basics, but overcompensating with a sense of togetherness, right? The most touching moments of the story are when we are by that campfire, right? We've settled in for the night. The gamblers are probably in their hotels and their kind of, nicer lodgings for the night, but this young troop of white men is with the black folk, right? Who sleep out in the fields, right? Who sleep out in this communal way together, but it seems like the warmest and most touching and most genuine moments that we get in the story, especially compared to the end with Tilford. The race people go away, our white protagonist remains with Bildad and the black folk, right? So he stays with these people. And when you live with people and start to, have those experiences, right? Those day-to-day experiences, obviously your thoughts toward a particular race of people will change. I remember hearing that a long time ago, that a lot of people who harbor these very racist attitudes, you have to remember, some of them have never met, say it's a white person, they've never met a black person in their life, right? So maybe it's easy, yet ironically strange, but easy to harbor these strong, intense feelings toward a group of people when you've never met them, where they could then start to defy that idea that you have in your mind, right? So, but he's doing the opposite. He's spending the time here. Now, we start to focus on two horses here, two thoroughbreds. The first is named Sunstreak. It's a nice name for a horse. It's likened to an alluring female, right? Like an enticing, alluring female. And this is the horse trained by Jerry Tillford. And at first, Jerry Tillford, when he sees our narrator just kind of peering in and gawking at the thoroughbreds as the trainers are spending some time with the horses, Jerry Tillford's very kind to our narrator, right? And if, let's say he is a symbol of the white race, right? You could say that, yeah, of course, at some introductory level, the white race is going to be very appealing in terms of welcoming an individual into that sense of allegiance, right? Look at the world we have. Look at what we have at our disposal. Look at how you're better than these people. You read up on the history, there was a strong vernacular, a strong language, a strong rhetoric, right, to make white people feel superior, right, in many ways. So at first it's friendly, right? It's welcoming. That will change once we see the behind the scenes with Mr. Jerry Tillford. Our narrator says when he's speaking about Sunstreak, it makes you ache to see him, which is ironic. If you're seeing something that you truly like and appreciate and desire, you wouldn't think it's going to lead to like a gut ache, which is what it seems to be here, something almost physical. But that's what he experiences, almost a discomfort at seeing this horse and being so taken by it, right? And there's another horse named Middle Stride, right? That's the other horse, Middle Stride. Sunstreak is said to think about holding himself back till the time for the running came. So there is this kind of, I guess you could call it a prudence. I guess you could call it a special care that Sunstreak takes, but he saves all of his energy. You know how these horses are, they explode, right? Once that, the gate drops, right, and everything, they explode on that course. But this horse in particular is said to think about holding himself back. So it's like reserving that energy until the very last moment. Maybe there's a sense of decency involved there, instead of just, spending it all up front or flaunting it or whatever, but he holds it back to the last moment where it truly matters. Just something to take note of when it comes to this horse. There is no need to exert energy for no reason or flaunt some strength in vain. The narrator acknowledges the grace and power of the ability of this horse to subdue his power and strength to the last moment. And at that point, maybe we're talking about the human race, or let's say segments of the human race, right? To know when to hold back that power and keep things restrained. and to save it for a proper moment. Maybe that's a comment on who we are as people. It could be. He seems to share in this respect for Sunstreak with Jerry, right? They both have a strong respect for the animal within this moment, right, when they're getting this horse ready for the race. And therefore, he even says, he uses a strong word here, which he doesn't use much throughout, he loves Jerry Tillford. Now, I think this is problematic, because I think at this point in the story, the more the narrator and the narration in general focuses on Jerry Tillford, the more we forget about our old friendship. We forget about Bildad Johnson, and that's the friendship we should not be forgetting about, because it's been quite tangible and very plausible throughout, right? He really is providing for the narrator and his friends. He really is looking out for them. He really is generous. He really is that old friend. And now here comes this white man, right? The trainer of this horse, and he's in a quick amount of time, maybe even taking advantage of the feelings he has for the horse and those characteristics, he's able to hijack, right, our narrator. And now, I love this man, right, which are some strong words here. So much that he claims to love him more than his own father, even, right? And I find that one less troubling than forgetting Bildad, right? Because Bildad is the most powerful sense of genuine care, right, and friendship. And companionship that we get in this whole story, and we're starting to kind of forget about him. As I just said, yeah, any adoration, respect for Bildad seems to just disappear. He says, I cried and Jerry Tillford had a shine in his eye. So he's crying based on some adoration of this horse and this man, and Tilford's got a shine in his eyes, and it's tough to say what to make of that, but a gleam. Maybe he's like, loving it, right? It's just a testament to the power, right, of his influence, how quickly it can happen. The horse was better than me. That's what our narrator says, in all of humanity, it seems. It was the first time I ever felt for a man like that. And maybe those words should be reserved for Bildad, but that's okay. He gives them to Jerry. But this is just part one of Jerry, right? We're going to see what happens here in just a minute. He appreciates Jerry's rearing of the horse almost like a mother that has raised her young, right? Feels that's, look what I've done. Look at this horse that I have groomed and trained to be such a spectacular kind of achievement here, right? I should be proud of this. And maybe there is that sense of pride, that sense of ego that we start to establish here in Jerry Tillford. All right, Jerry becomes a stand-in father figure at Saratoga. He just said, I love him more than my dad. Why would there be such an appeal to this man in such a short amount of time? Is it because he has found a white man who at least seems as if he is as close to the racehorse as the black track workers, right? Someone maybe he can finally relate to that is white. Up to this point, in order to be close to this experience with these horses, you've had to imagine yourself within the shoes of a black person, right? Now we see that there is this white alternative. But we find Jerry, and he's so attracted to this man that he goes out and he looks for him. Like he wants to go hang out with him. So he starts walking around some of the nearby areas, right, where he thinks he's heard of Jerry going here, and he finds Jerry in a corrupted state. What is he doing that establishes this corruption? Drinking with prostitutes. He's in a generally described kind of tainted, stained, and sullied environment, right? That's where he's spending his time, with all these other kind of raucous men and women. And he's also having an he's being intimate with a woman who is likened to the horse Middlestride, right? So a woman who's likened to Middlestride. Now remember, Sunstreak was described as an alluring woman, an attractive woman. Middlestrake here you're going to recognize with this prostitute that's being likened to this horse is kind of ugly, right? And lacks that charm, right? Lacks that attraction. Not Sunstreak. Not Sunstreak, who he describes as a girl you want to kiss. But here Jerry is kissing something that our narrator feels is not respectable, I guess we could say. In fact, Jerry has seemingly been unfaithful to Sunstreak and his actions with this prostitute. I think that's a wonderful way of thinking about it, right? We saw the connection he had to his horse a moment ago. how the horse was described. Now he's seeming to throw that all behind him and go with this prostitute who doesn't seem to be described on that level, and also is described as Middlemarch, the competition of Sunstreak. All in all, maybe, as the narrator says, not clean, right? Not clean. Morals, ethics. We end with the narrator saying, an N wouldn't go into such a place. A black person would never go in that place that Jerry is spending this time in right now, right? And we get that defining line. Black people possess, to put it bluntly, better morals and ethics, right, than white people, if we start to use these as heavy symbols within the text. Bildad would never be caught dead in a place like that, right? He'd be back with the horses, admiring the horses. But rather, this reflects a complete loss of faith in his own race, to be decent, to respect the grace and strength of the horse. So I think seeing Jerry Tillford, after being so enamored by him a moment ago, after finding him in this state, it kind of drags him back down here, right? Jerry bragged, and there's the big word, bragging. There's that ego, there's that pride, there's that sense of competition, right? I did really well on my marathon last week. Not like some people do, right? It's pushing these crazy, crazy times, but for me, I did very well, and a part of me wants to brag, right? I want to tell people about this. Look what I did, right? Look at how awesome I did on this day. All the training I did, right, that went into this. I haven't really bragged too much, but you get the idea. It comes with that idea of competition, right? Boosting our sense of ego. So Jerry brags about Sunstreak, which puts on his display of his egotistical nature. In fact, Jerry brags as he knew Sunstreak wouldn't never have bragged. So he even says even Sunstreak is the type of animal, or let's say being, that wouldn't brag about those achievements, and it's Sunstreak who's actually doing those things, right? So kind of riding the coattails of the success of this horse and using it for his own fortitude and building up of his own ego and pride. The horse therefore represents being humble, a sense of humility, and this is certainly the case for our narrator, right, after seeing Jerry in this state. Jerry is enamored, attracted to the prostitute, and his eyes begin to shine. There's the shine once again, right? We saw it used with our narrator, left an impression on him, and now he's wasting that, you could say, or spending that on this prostitute as well. So obviously our narrator is not going to feel very special, or that the connection he had with this man was special, if he's just passing this on to the next woman, a woman that he feels is unclean, right, and has these issues. All right. He wishes he wouldn't have chased longingly Jerry to this house. Like, what a fool I am to follow this man, only to see what I have seen. He regrets being taken away from the black folk. He regrets being taken away from the boys, right? Young and innocent, right? The black people, as he always constantly says, the ends, very ironically in the story, and yet the word is so disparaging, and yet if we kind of peel it off here, peel it back, we recognize his affinity for these black people, right? That's who he wants to, if not does, identify with more than his own white race, which can be a journey for perhaps many white people in this country, right? Especially when you learn the history, at least me personally speaking, right? Especially when you learn the history. Okay, and the horses, which are, you must get back to the horses, which are a cut above all of us, a cut above our own humanity, and they have transcended this corruption, right? All of these horses. And this all leads to a hatred of Jerry. And maybe that, you know, in terms of the moral, ethical development that takes place over the course of the story, maybe that's how we want this to end. We want that hatred to be placed back upon Jerry, that false, egotistical, prideful white world, right? Perhaps based on these tenets of capitalism. But we want to turn against that once again. It seems to keep in line with where we started. He's a disruption in the story. Jerry is a disruption and intrusion, and I think we get over him by the end. The narrator keeps all this to himself, and this makes sense when we think about the personal journey that this represents for him, right? This is a very personal story. Despite the fact that he's going out and having quite an experience and going to these places and around all these people, this is a very personal experience, especially toward the end for our narrator. At the very end, toward the end, we get this allusion to the word strident. Strident is, I think it was another racehorse mentioned. A clear movement forward. Obviously a great name for a racehorse. To stride forward. But I think we think of that more thematically at the end here. That a young man who has dispelled these false allegiances to a white race has, in a sense, strode forward, made progress, right, within this world of race relations, morals and ethics, our personal character, how we perceive our relationship to others. He's moved forward here. He's gotten over a big hump, as we just said, with Jerry. That idea of a race could be a progress for our narrator in his moral and ethical revival of racial conscience. Maybe he digs deep enough, just like Sunstreak is mentioned to save up all the energy he needs to make this transition, to make this change. Maybe we saw it, right, in how he dealt with that issue with Jerry Tillford at the end. All right, the ultimate confusion or paradox, I guess I could say, comes in how Jerry could, I'll use the language here, see a horse like Sunstreak run and kiss a woman like that the same day, to take part in the awe and majesty of Sunstreak, right, running the way, and we've characterized that horse decently in the text. How could he admire that and be a part of that and then kiss that prostitute, the one likened to middle stride? How could he do that all in the same day? It shows a hypocrisy, right? It shows a contradiction of character. We can broaden that, right, to the white race in general, perhaps, right? He seems to have defiled the reverential nature of the horse. That's what Jerry did. And our narrator will not allow that, right, to kind of pass. He will hold him accountable for that, of course, in his own mind and his own heart. This paradox spoils the sanctity and warmth he feels with black people, right? And we end, which I think is a great title, and it's hard to know exactly how to interpret the title, but I want to know why, right? Why? And that question, I want to know why, is all about Jerry at the end here, right? How could he present some aspect of himself and then show the true colors, right, at the end there in that final state? I want to know why that can happen in the first place, right? And that's a difficult question to answer. All right, that's going to do it. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I really admired this story. I think I really appreciated this story from the moment I finished it, because it seems experimental for Anderson, right? Especially with that repetitive use of the N-word. But anybody who reads this story is going to clearly, I think almost right away, start to get that irony, right? That sense of irony, that this is about breaking from one allegiance and perhaps allowing yourself to follow another that seems more genuine, more caring, more warm, which is so important for us as individuals, right? All right, thank you. Have a beautiful day.